insurgent commander pressed his boot against the wounded ranger's throat and laughed. Not a short laugh, a long one, the kind a man produces when he believes the math has finally worked out in his favor. Sergeant First Class David Nkosi was on his back in the dirt, 3 rounds in his left leg and 1 grazing his shoulder, and he was looking up at a sky the color of old chalk while the man standing over him said something in Pashto that none of the remaining team could translate because their interpreter was already dead. Nkosi's rifle was 6 feet away. It might as well have been 6 miles. That was the moment Specialist Renata Voss stopped counting ammunition crates and started doing a different kind of math. She had been in the Army for 4 years, which was long enough to know her lane and stay in it. Her MOS was 92A, Automated Logistical Specialist. Inventory. Supply. She tracked rounds, not trajectories. She cataloged equipment, cross-referenced manifests, filed discrepancy reports in triplicate when the numbers didn't add up. She was exceptionally good at this. Her section Staff Sergeant Pierce, once told her that if the Army ever fielded a competition for fastest accurate inventory under fire, Voss would medal. He meant it as a compliment. She accepted it as one. What Pierce didn't know, and what Voss had never seen a reason to advertise, was that she'd grown up in eastern Montana on a ranch that measured itself in sections rather than acres, and that her grandfather, a retired Marine warrant officer named Aldous Voss, had started teaching her to shoot at the age of 7. Not plinking, not targets, real marksmanship, the kind that required understanding why a bullet does what it does across distance, not just pulling a trigger and hoping. By the time Renata was 12, she could calculate a firing solution in her head faster than most adults could with a ballistic app. By 16, she was shooting sub-MOA groups at 800 yards with a 300 and 800 yards with a 308 her grandfather had built from parts. By 19, when she enlisted, she had quietly logged more trigger time behind precision rifles than most soldiers accumulate in a career. She enlisted as a 92A because her grandfather told her that combat was unpredictable and logistics kept people alive, and she trusted his judgment on matters of survival more than she trusted anyone else's. She did her job. She stayed in her lane until the morning of the 14th of November when her lane disappeared. The patrol had been a routine presence mission in a valley the battalion called Green Corridor, which was Army shorthand for a route that had been cleared enough times that people had started to believe the clearing was permanent. It was not permanent. Nothing in that country was permanent except the mountains and the patience of the men who lived in them. Voss was attached to the patrol as a logistics rider, there to document captured equipment and inventory, any sensitive items recovered at the objective. She carried an M4 because everyone carried an M4, but she hadn't fired it in a combat context in 2 years, and nobody on the patrol was thinking about her as a trigger puller. She was the clipboard. She was the accountant. She was, in the hierarchy of people who mattered when bullets started moving, approximately last. The ambush came from 3 directions simultaneously, which told the patrol's leader, Captain Owen Hargreaves, that whoever had planned it had done their homework. Hargreaves was hit in the first 3 seconds, not fatally but badly enough that he was out of the command picture before he could orient to the threat. His radio operator went down 30 seconds later. Sergeant First Class Nkosi took over and ran the patrol backward toward a collection of compound walls that offered at minimum the feeling of cover, which in a bad enough situation counts for something. They made it. 7 of them made it. 4 didn't. Nkosi organized a perimeter in the time it took most people to understand they were in a perimeter, and for 8 minutes the patrol held. Then an RPG collapsed the section of wall that Nkosi was using as a firing position, and the blast caught him across the legs and threw him into the open ground between the compounds. And that was when the math changed. Voss saw it from her position along the interior wall. She saw Nkosi go down. She saw the insurgent commander move toward him. She saw the rifle, Nkosi's SR-25, a semi-automatic precision rifle, the platoon's longest-range capable weapon, lying in the dirt 3 feet from Nkosi's outstretched hand. And she understood with the particular clarity that comes only in certain moments that if someone did not pick that rifle up in the next 30 seconds, 7 people were going to die. She ran for it. Private First Class Derek Achebe, 20 years old and on his 2nd deployment, watched Voss sprint through 15 feet of open ground and felt his stomach drop. He was certain she was going to be shot before she reached the weapon. She was not shot. She slid into the dirt beside Nkosi, got her hands on the SR-25, and pressed herself flat against the ground while 2 rounds kicked up dust, 6 inches from her left boot. Voss, Nkosi said, and his voice was the voice of a man concentrating very hard on not passing out. Boss, what are you, Sergeant? I need you to be quiet for a second, she said. He was quiet. What Voss understood in that moment, and what she did not have time to explain to anyone, was that the weapon in her hands was chambered in 7.62 NATO, that it was topped with a loopholed Mark IV variable scope, currently set to its lowest magnification, that the insurgent commander who was standing over Nkosi's original position was approximately 340 yards away, based on her prior inventory of the compound layout, and that 340 yards was for her, not a difficult shot. The difficulty was everything else. She had no spotter. She had no wind data beyond what she could read from the dust patterns moving across the open ground, which told her the wind was light and variable from the northwest at perhaps 4 to 6 miles per hour. The scope was set at 4 power, which was workable. She didn't know the zero on this rifle. It was Nkosi's rifle, zero to Nkosi's preferences, and she had no idea whether he'd adjusted for elevation or kept a come-up card she could reference. The barrel was warm, but not overheated. There was a round, chambered. She did the math. She did it the way her grandfather had taught her, the way she had done it 1,000 times on the flats of eastern Montana, with nothing but wind and distance and the particular silence of committed attention. She calculated the drop. She estimated the wind drift. She found her position, which was bad. She was on her side in the dirt with Nkosi's body half in her field of view, and she adjusted. She controlled her breathing. She found the commander in the scope. He was still laughing. She thought about the 7 people behind her. She thought about Nkosi, who was still breathing but wouldn't be if the next 30 seconds went the wrong direction. She thought briefly and without sentimentality about her grandfather, who had told her once that a rifle is only useful to the person who knows what it's for. She exhaled halfway and held it. She took the shot. The commander dropped. For 3 full seconds, nothing else moved, and in those 3 seconds, Voss cycled the bolt by instinct, found a second target, and took that shot too. The second man had been moving toward Nkosi from the right flank, and he went down at 210 yards, and after that, the remaining insurgents made a decision that was the correct decision, which was to leave. Voss lay in the dirt for a moment longer than she needed to. She was aware of someone speaking near her. A Chebe, she thought, saying something she couldn't quite assemble into words. She was aware of the sound of a distant helicopter, which meant either their QRF had been scrambled or someone else's had. She was aware that her hands were completely steady, which surprised her in a technical sort of way, because she had expected adrenaline to be more disruptive than this. Then Nkosi said her name again, and she came back. "You hit," she said, already moving. She pulled the tourniquet from his left leg carrier by feel. 2 rounds in the lower leg, 1 possible femur. I need to get this on before Voss. Sergeant. Where did you learn to shoot like that? She considered the question while she tightened the tourniquet. Montana, she said. He didn't say anything else for a while. The QRF landed 19 minutes later. Captain Hargreaves was evacuated with a perforated lung and would survive, though not entirely intact. Of the 12 soldiers on the original patrol, 7 reached the evacuation point under their own power or with assistance. The 4 who hadn't made it to the compound wall were recovered the following morning. Voss rode the medevac with Nkosi because someone had to, and because Achebe was busy, and because nobody told her not to. She sat against the vibrating wall of the Black Hawk, with the SR-25 across her knees, and watched the valley drop away beneath them. And she thought about the math she had done in the dirt, and whether it had been right. It had been right. She knew it had been right. The math was the part she was certain about. The rest of it she was less certain about. At the forward operating base, a flight surgeon named Major Pritchard met the medevac and took custody of Nkosi with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this many times. A military police sergeant she didn't recognize asked her twice whether she was injured, and both times she said no. An intelligence officer collected the SR-25 and asked her to describe the engagement in sequence, and she did, starting with the wall collapsing and ending with the helicopter. The intelligence officer wrote things down. He didn't ask her about her moss. When she told him, he paused with his pen above the paper for a moment and then said, "Okay," in the tone of a person revising a prior assumption. That evening, in a logistics tent that served as her duty section, Staff Sergeant Pierce found her recalibrating an inventory discrepancy in a Class 4 requisition and stood in the entrance for a moment without saying anything. "Pierce," she said, without looking up. "Word travels fast on an FOB," he said. "I know. People are saying you dropped 2 at 300 with a weapon you'd never fired. 340 and 210, she said. And I didn't know the zero. I estimated." Pierce sat down across the table from her. He was a careful man who had learned that most problems in the Army, including the ones that looked like operations problems, were actually supply problems in disguise. He looked at her the way he looked at an inventory that wasn't adding up. "Voss," he said, "why are you in logistics?" She set down her pen. She thought about her grandfather, who had told her that the best way to keep people alive was to make sure they had what they needed. She thought about 4 years of ensuring exactly that, and she thought about the morning she just had, and she thought about the fact that both things were true at the same time. "Because supply matters," she said. Pierce nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "but maybe supply isn't the only thing you've got to offer." She picked up her pen. She didn't answer him. 3 days later, Sergeant First Class Kinkosi was transferred to Landstuhl. Before the transport lifted off, someone brought her to the medevac staging area to see him. He was on a litter, his left leg immobilized, an IV line in his right arm, and he looked better than she'd expected, which wasn't saying much, but was saying something. "Montana," he said when he saw her. "Sergeant, I've been thinking about what I was going to say to you. You don't have to say anything." "I do," he said. "I've been in this Army for 16 years. In those 16 years, I've had my life depend on someone else's ability to do something correctly exactly 5 times. He paused. He was the kind of man who counted precisely. That morning was one of them. "I want you to know I understand what that means. I don't think I'll ever be able to tell you what it's worth." Voss stood with her hands at her sides. Outside the staging tent, the transport's rotors were beginning to spool. "You would have done it," she said, "if you could have reached the rifle." "Maybe," Nkosi said, "but I couldn't, and you could, and that's the whole story." The medic signaled that they needed to move. Voss stepped back. Tosi held her gaze for a moment, and then the litter moved, and he was gone. She went back to her inventory. She requisitioned Class 4V materials. She filed her discrepancy reports. She caught an error in a fuel allocation that would have shorted the motor pool by 400 gallons, and she flagged it, and she was right. She did her job, which she was good at, and she did it with the same attention she brought to everything. But sometimes, when the FOB was quiet and the generators had settled into their low thrum and the night was very dark, she would take out the small notebook she kept in her left breast pocket, and she would write down a number, a distance, a wind speed, an estimated drift. She would do the math without a scope or a target, just for the practice, just to keep the edge where her grandfather had put it, clean and maintained and ready. She didn't talk about it. There was no reason to talk about it. What she'd done was what the moment had required. Nothing more, nothing less. The math had been correct. The outcome had been what the math predicted. The rest of it. The weight of what it meant to save a life by ending another, the particular silence that followed a shot taken in total certainty, the way a Tuesday morning in November could become something you carried for the rest of your life. That part didn't go in the notebook. There wasn't a formula for that part. There wasn't supposed to be.